recording the conversation, as I do think it'll be a very important one, and one that we can, share snippets of and things like that. So to begin, I would like to introduce the panel that is here. So let me begin with Tanya. That's the first person I see on my screen. So, okay, go ahead if you just want to let us know your name and a bit about your background.
Sure. I'm Tanya Rasso. I'm a doctoral candidate in clinical psychology, which is like fancy way of saying like I'm almost out of this tunnel and I'm just got my foot like hanging on. So I'll be done at the end of June. And I've been, although I'm like, in school, I've been doing clinical work for the last 10 years, predominantly with communities of color. And I would say specifically with women. I mean, we can get into that, but that's who shows up most often. Yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to be here and thanks for including me.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanya. All right, what about you, Hannah?
There. Hi, my name is Hannah Lee Sandoval. I'm currently pursuing my license as a social worker. So I'm in private practice, but I've been involved in faith-based community organizing, working with at-risk youth, and usually mentoring and school-based sort of relationships. I was a school counselor and a substitute teacher in downtown LA, Koreatown for 5-6 years. So yeah, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I can't wait to listen and learn.
Thanks so much. Okay, Luz.
Yeah, my name is Luz Emma Cañas Madrigal, and I'm a dance movement therapist and a Sufi healer and a teaching artist. So I teach yoga and capoeira Angola, which is Afro-Brazilian martial art. So essentially, I use all of the things whenever they're called upon. So I used to work in outpatient with pre-verbal children to adolescents and teenagers. I used to work with incarcerated youth, young men convicted of violent crimes. I worked in psychiatric facilities, but because I had my own family to raise, I took a break for my own mental health. To be more present for my family, and also I was in a domestically violent relationship for years, so I felt conflicted. And I felt like I needed to focus on my family, which I have, and now my children are adults and on their way, and I'm finding my way back to being called upon to be a therapist, especially now. So recently I've been working in transformative justice, facilitating accountability processes. And I have also been working with activists and organizers to help them as they protest.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, just to give a quick overview of how we can do this. What I'm thinking is I have different questions and things like that to just kind of spur the conversation on. But know that the panelists will each speak, okay? So Luz, Tanya, Hannah will each give their response and their perspective. But if you all who are here watching have questions or have a comment and want to, make sure that you are also heard, because this is meant to be a dialogue. So you can either raise your hand. I don't know if everybody knows how to do that with Zoom. If you, see, does everybody know how to do it, or do you need me to run through it? Okay, everybody okay? All right, well, Mariella, I don't see your video, so hopefully you do. But also there's okay, great. There's also the chat feature, okay, as well. So if you want to, you can either raise your hand or just type your question into the chat and then it'll pop up. I can read it out and things like that. But feel free to unmute yourself and speak as well, So I think that what I was going to start with is basically a conversation about what you all do normally to take care of your mental health. So this means in the day-to-day, what you do to just make sure that you are taking care of yourself. What I also wanted to clarify by speaking about mental health and things like that, the topic in general is just to let you know that I'm talking about things as clear and specific as having something that you've been diagnosed with, bipolar disorder or ADHD, you know, something that you have truly been diagnosed with and are handling, but also the idea of just taking care of yourself mentally and allowing yourself to take a time out, not feeling like you have to push through, being able to say to somebody, I can't deal with this right now, I need to take a step back, right? So the ability to actually verbalize, I need some mental health and mental self-care. So both of those things are what I'm talking about and what the conversation will be about. So yeah, I guess we can just, if any of the panelists, you can just raise your hand and I can call on you. That way I don't have to like just kind of keep doing the same circle, you know? So, or you could just also just raise your hand in the screen too, and then you could speak. So what is it that you normally do to just take care of yourself mentally in the day-to-day way that you need to?
I guess I'll go. Daily, I meditate daily. I have a deep meditation practice. So I try to get it in early because the way our minds work is that we put it off and then, you know, it's almost midnight. And the way that the meditations that I do, they have to be done every day for a certain amount of days. It's like an alchemical process.
Okay.
So that kind of keeps me on task. The fact that I have to do it before midnight. If I am really stressed or going through things like in crisis, I usually journal.
Okay.
And for self-care, just kind of, I love cooking, so I'll make elaborate meals. Yeah. So I think those are like the major things that I do.
So let me ask you also, because I always have trouble with journaling. So what does that look like for you? I think my issue sometimes is that I feel like it should be every day, and then I have trouble being consistent with every day, period. I think I may blame it on my sign. I am a Gemini, so it sometimes can be hard for me to be every day consistent. But so I have trouble with that. And so what does it look like for you when you have a journaling practice?
Well, because it usually is when I'm kind of in crisis, although I've been trying to shift that to just document my life, you know, kind of shift, you know, not shift having writing be associated with crisis. Instead, like talk about my joy or write about my joy.
Yeah.
And I don't make it a chore necessarily, you know, like a job, because I also write. I'm a writer.
Okay.
So journaling is very different than writing. So like, let's say I'm writing or editing, that's a job. And I set my time. I'm like from, you know, 9 a.m. to 4 a.m. or not 9 a.m. to like 4 in the afternoon. Like I will stare at my computer if I have to, or I'll go over a sentence like for hours if I have to. Or, you know, go between social media, Twitter, and then editing. So that's kind of more like a job. But whereas journaling is more like, I'll go to a coffee shop and, you know, I'll kind of process my life, like where I'm at, or it'll be more informal. So, and it all depends on where I am, like kind of my mental state.
Yeah. Okay. And then I also wanted to see about the alchemical meditation that you do. If you can tell us a little more about what that also looks like. Usually how many days is it? And it sounds like there's a lot of ritual. It's not just a sitting meditation.
No, well, no, it's chanting. I teach Kundalini yoga. So Kundalini usually entails asanas, which is breath work, mudras, which are finger or hand positions, and mantra, which are incantations. So basically whatever conundrum or life condition that you have, you do a certain mantra, and then you do it for a certain number of days. So 40 days is usually the amount of time. They say it takes 40 days to break a habit and to create a new habit. 40 days, but there also are ones for 90 days and also ones for not 90 days, 120 days, or a year.
Okay, interesting. All right, so question to the next panelist, the same question, what you do daily to deal with your mental health.
I guess I'll go, if that's okay. I think for me, it's been really hard, particularly right now, like to see what's happening in the world. That's been constant, right? Like we know that like Black bodies have been murdered for, forever, literally since the country's been started. But for me, I used to really like to engage on social media with friends, and that's a good way of me keeping in touch with people. I've like moved cross coast and I have friends like all over, and it's always been helpful for me to stay on top of like, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, like just seeing what my friends' lives are up to. And for me, it's been a very conscious decision and effort to limit my news intake. Like I know how bad it is, and I don't have the right answer. I'm not saying that that's what everyone should be doing. I think a level of engagement is very necessary, but for me right now, I know that it's just been depressing and makes me angry, and there's only so much like disgust I can show with like I'll be honest, with like fellow like people from like the Latinx community, that I'm like, damn, you're really anti-Black and you don't see that, or like, wow, you really align with white supremacy, and there's no way I'm going to change your mind, especially on like Facebook, so my way has just been like detaching. This weekend I've been doing like a lot of like Zoom or phone calls with friends that I hadn't talked to in a while, and just to like try and get like a temperature read on like, hey, how are you doing? Like, I miss you. And this has also been very hard to be away from people while we're sheltering in place or like quarantining. So for me, it's to have like conscious interactions now that I am limited in my interactions. So I'm lucky to be able to have friends, and I'm like, okay, cool, like you're doing okay, I'm doing okay, let's try and make this feel normal in our sheltering in place. And let's talk about how we're frustrated, but also like for me it's been helpful to talk about how grateful I am for certain things that I can control right now.
Interesting. Okay, thank you, Tanya. What about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I really resonate with both Luce and Tanya here. I also have a daily meditation practice out of Christian faith. And that's been challenging lately because I really have been seeing that the call for justice hasn't been something in the church. So I've been really wrestling with that. But I really do lean on my faith and my faith community. We, pray together for safety and justice with all that's going on right now. We talk a lot very honestly and very vulnerably about what we're struggling with. One of the big things as an Asian American woman is it's hard to say no. I'm a wife and a mom to an 18-month-old son who's very active, and just really being able to put aside the guilt and shame that comes up when I need to say no, and just let my partner know and my family know, like, I need help, I can't do this. And then allowing myself to feel the guilt and shame of not being able to do everything, and then to be kind to myself. So practicing self-compassion and boundaries has been huge. And I actually, my pastor, he asked me to make a video on self-care for my church. I was really surprised. And, I talked about how during the pandemic, it's something as simple as sleeping and eating normally and getting outside to exercise a little bit. All of those are hard right now. We don't have the same access to food, to the outdoor spaces. A lot of us don't feel safe out there. My cousin, who is Korean, he was mugged for being Asian out in just broad daylight. So a lot of us didn't feel safe to even go grocery shopping, but it was like, I think we need to kind of find that balance, say no when we need to, and then embrace a yes together, and support one another in just finding that balance and being kind to ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody who is watching want to just chime in with anything that they do in particular that they want to share about any of the self-care that you all do for yourselves? Okay, good. All right, so I did want to ask actually, so I wanted to sort of dive a little bit into what you had mentioned, Tanya, about the fact that there's only so much you can say within the Latinx community, and that some people align with white supremacist ideals without knowing it and things like that. So what I want to ask all of us is what that feels like and how difficult it is to. Let me start from my perspective. A lot of times I will feel like being Black seems to be the worst thing that you could be in America, right? So it seems like although there's racism for all colors and things like that, and we have all experienced trauma, but it's almost like Black is the worst color that you can be. So while, you can sort of fit in a little bit if you're Asian or Hispanic, but everybody, even Asians and Hispanics, will also feel like, oh, those Black people, like they're the worst. And so I will experience racism even when I'm encountering other Asians or Hispanics, right? And they might have a comment about like, oh, what do you expect? It was a Black person sort of energy. That seems to have been a messaging that I guess has been so woven into the world that it's easy for people to feel like, oh, well, of course, this Black person, that happened to them or whatever. So I want to know what you all think about this kind of situation. Do you find it in your communities that there is that sort of racism that extends to Blacks as well? Do you find it difficult to have conversations with people that are in your community because of the fact that sometimes they may not understand and they don't want to hear it and they don't have much compassion, not self-compassion, don't have as much compassion because they don't really see themselves reflected in what's happening to a Black person, let's say. So I guess I'll start with you, Tanya, since you had brought up the comment. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a huge problem. I'll speak specifically from Latinx, kind of like viewpoint. I think it's a huge problem in our community. There's a lot of not only colorism, but like anti-Blackness. It's portrayed in every type of situation, like from media to household to who we consider Latinx or not. Like if you look at how Latinos are portrayed in the media, it's someone that probably looks like me or lighter. There's very rarely like an Afro-Latino that's like shown as like, this is what Latinx folk look like, I mean, I grew up in a family that like even, they'll say stuff where I'm like, whoa, that was really racist, or like, that was really like, sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on here, but I'm like, that was really fucked up, and like the pushback that you get sometimes. I do think that anti-Blackness is a huge problem, but I also think that colorism in general is a problem. Like often you hear like, don't get too dark, or like, don't put your hair like that. You look like essentially like Indigenous. I'm like, that's a bad thing, even though I am, so yeah, it's a huge problem. I think sometimes the most frustrating conversations I have are within my own community about people who are like, well, if people just listen to the cops, things like this wouldn't happen. And I don't understand why they're destroying their own communities. And there's a lack of insight into the historical violence of white supremacy and like literally planting people in the protests to trash communities of color to make it look like the peaceful protesters are rioting and that we're all just like these dangerous, violent people. but there's such a divide there, because I think sadly Latinx people have been able to have a toe in like the white world. I don't think we're accepted by white people, but a lot of us quote unquote serve them, so it's like, how much do you want to align with something that you perceive as like an in to like this better treatment and better world, or do you want to like pull back and be like, wait, this whole system is really messed up and there shouldn't be people who get a pass in and out or get higher, like on the hierarchy of how we're treated based on race. Like, I'm not willing to give up my privilege to help somebody down the ladder,
Right.
So it's a difficult conversation, and it's something that's not talked about enough in our community.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Hannah or Luz, any of you?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback Tanya, like resonating and just like, yes, yes, yes. I definitely, I grew up in the Korean church. I grew up in a very conservative immigrant home. I went to actually a predominantly white Christian school for until college. And absolutely, yes, racism.
Racism.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting feedback. Are we okay?
I think we are. Sometimes it just seems like it just pops up.
Okay.
I think it's just Zoom acting up.
Yeah, got it. So yeah, definitely. I experienced racism. I saw people of color pitted against one another, even as a young person. And I continue to see it. And it's something that I have, really had a burden to address in the church, in my home, in my family. And Tanya, like that feeling of like, I can't change you. That's been something that's been so heavy on me as well. And I've been talking with friends about like Korean privilege, even in the API community, as an East Asian and a light-skinned Asian, right? I'm privileged, and how much do we align ourselves with white people to pursue security and success, right, for ourselves without thinking of others? And that idea of security is actually huge because Koreans also bring trauma from their own history, but it doesn't justify, just because I was traumatized doesn't mean it's okay for me to go and traumatize someone else. I need to deal with that. There's a real big movement of the second generation of Asian Americans that I've seen, especially in the churches, where we've really distanced ourselves from our parents, who are immigrants who came here to work hard, but really only thought about themselves, very ethnocentric. And in our homes, in our family gatherings, in our churches, in our shared spaces, we confront. It's unpleasant, it's painful. We're still working through that, but a lot of us are now parents. A lot of us are now professionals. So we use what platforms we have and the things that we know to really advocate for change. And we're trying to raise our children very differently. But that model minority piece, Hattie and I were discussing how it's really, what she said was we've been triangulated into the racist tension between Black and white. And that was really indicative in the LA riots. And, there was an Asian American officer involved in the murder of George Floyd, and that was heartbreaking for us. And, we're feeling repentant and involved in this because we were silent. And now we're like, we can't be triangulated this anymore. We need to ally. We do not want to be used as a community that's used to shame by being the model minority and saying, why can't you be like them? And it's time for us to speak out and stand against it. But yeah, it definitely exists.
Yeah. It is very hard. Luz, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do. Yes, identity is something interesting for me. I'm Mexican, but I'm the darker African Mexican. And I was born in East Cleveland in a very Black neighborhood. Wasn't raised here, but yeah, I was radicalized and racialized when I was called the N-word as a child. I was bullied, and because of that, because I was much darker as a child than I am now, I did go through a period where I wanted to be white and tried to lighten my skin. Because I was bullied, and I was also a dancer. So this was before there was a Misty Copeland, there there weren't any Black ballerinas or any brown ballerinas. They were like the white passing Latinas, or you know, it would be like the token light skinned Latina or the token light skinned Asian, you know, dancer in the ballet companies. So, you know, as a child, you know, searching for identity and then gravitating, almost being embraced by, you know, Black community, I felt more alignment with the Black community than, you know, the Latinx or Latino community, because I was raised in LA in the suburbs around a whole bunch of white folks. So as soon as I could, I was in Watts, I was in Inglewood, you know, and hip hop was, you know, just blowing up. So, you know, I was in the hood. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And then from there, I moved, you know, as an adult. Both of my kids are biracial, they're half Black. And I homeschooled my kids, and their education was very rooted in the African, you know, diaspora experience, because I didn't want them to have what I didn't have. Yeah. And we moved to New York, where there's a plethora of, you know, Afro-Latinos or Latinx people, which is really refreshing, because in New York, it's expected that all Black people speak Spanish. So you could be, you know, African American, but the assumption is, you know, you're of the diaspora. You're from, like, you know, Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic or Cuba. So that's really refreshing. And as far as like anti-Blackness goes, because I was radicalized and racialized as a child, I've been fighting up against it with white folks, you know, that felt comfortable saying racist things in front of me as a child, as an adult, because of like socioeconomic status. So I've always been that feisty person that like calls people out and reminds them that, you know, just because I'm Latino or Latinx, that doesn't mean I'm not Black too.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's been my experience.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I'm wondering too, when these things happen, these sort of the explosion of trauma. So we are always experiencing, I would say, all communities of color experiencing microaggressions and things like that. So I do want to speak about how you deal with microaggressions, how you take care of yourself when those things happen. So, but I also am looking to see what you do when these moments of explosion happen, where we are really being traumatized in real time, and how you deal with that, and what you do to, how safe do you feel to express sort of like, I need to take care of myself? You know, is this an acceptable thing for you to say to friends, family? And is it acceptable for family to say to you, is I think more what I would like to know, because I have a feeling that for us, we are, you know, perhaps find it a little easier to express ourselves and convey our need for self-care and things like that, just based on our generation. But I also am from an immigrant family. My family's Haitian. And so I know that for my parents, it would be absolutely out of this world to be like, oh, I need to take a mental health day. Is just, I mean, I don't think that has ever occurred to them at all, ever. In fact, I have just so many crazy stories from my mom, where she has talked about, they went to Mexico for medical school, is where they studied, but before that they were in Jamaica for a while doing school there. And she has a story about being chased by a gunman who was like chasing her over walls and things like that. And the way that she told the story, it felt like it was like she had it was normal. It was like, this is, you know, you just had to deal with it. You just got through it. You just, you know, you climbed over the wall and escaped, and then you went to class and you just, you know, you focused on school.
What's that?
This was, sorry, say it again.
Where was that?
This was in Jamaica.
Jamaica.
But she has a lot of stories as well from Mexico too, where they loved their time there, both of them. But obviously, they did experience some microaggressions and racist comments. You know, even just the way that they're called. I think it was morena, and you know, so just lots of different things that they had to deal with. But they, you know, I just feel like there's definitely a buck up and keep going energy with a lot of immigrant families, and then a lot of older generations for sure. And so I'm just wondering about, how do you see family members dealing with these sorts of traumas that come up in, you know, explosively? And so I guess we'll start with that, and then we could talk about the microaggressions afterwards. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Hannah.
Oh yeah, I just I told Hattie that I wanted her to share with me what she wanted to share today since she's not here. She was sharing with me stories from the LA riots. Her mother actually called her the other day, and she was frightened because of the protests that had, you know, started to become violent, because she works in Koreatown and near downtown. And she was really, really triggered from her past trauma from the '92 riots. And Hattie's father-in-law also, his store burned down. She said that the Rodney King event happened right in front of his store. So, you know, when our parents, our older generation, who already have intergenerational trauma encoded into their DNA from war, and, you know, especially for Koreans, you know, we were oppressed by the Japanese for a time, and then to come here and think that you're getting away from all that, and then to see it's a different thing, but either way, everybody's kind of oppressing each other, right? And especially people of color being oppressed. They haven't resolved their own trauma. So then when they come here and they're traumatized again and again, and they're also traumatizing others, the only way to survive it is really silence and trying to just cope and wake up each morning and get to work and feed your kids. My father came to the US in the 70s, and he said one of his first memories is that there were a water fountain area, and there was one that said white and another one that said colored or black. And, you know, my father was in his 20s, had no idea about race dynamics or anything in America, and he was so confused. So I said, you know, where did you drink from? And he said, neither. I just didn't drink water because I didn't know what would happen. That was kind of really a story for me that was like, so you basically just froze, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Is he froze? And a lot of our older immigrant the first generation, are very frozen. I've seen a lot of kind of social, emotional, sort of, I don't want to say immaturity because that seems really judgmental and critical, but they're frozen to emotionally to when they came here. And then they see us now becoming adults, and we're the ones that can now carry them to a different place and say, hey, let's talk about your trauma. And how does your trauma inform your racist attitudes and your worldview? That's really about your own survival and seeing you as an independent entity rather than part of a community, right? So trauma begets trauma. And I think the second generation has just begun the work in the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, but really the last 10, 15 years, to go back to our older generation and to say, like, I'm old enough now to talk about it. I have kids of my own. Please tell me your story. Let's heal together and let's seek change for our third generation.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I'm really touched, Hannah, by something you said about, like, we now can, like, bring our parents and the older generation to healing. I think so often we think of, like, shoot, I'm 36 and my mom still treats me like I'm a baby, you know, like she wants to do everything for me. I have to, like, set limits where I'm like, listen, lady, you know, like, you don't have to provide. Like, I'm here now and I can provide for you. And I think so often the older generation, or I think maybe even it's just like a family thing, like you're their child, they want to constantly provide, they want to do for you, that it's so lovely that now we can step up and be like, hey, how are you though? Because you've always just been in this life of service and work and just grinding through to make it. And I think, particularly speaking as like a child of immigrants, I think a big part of the immigrant mentality is just keep going because everything's for the future, you know. And the idea of hearing any one of like the elders in my family say like, I need a mental health day or I need to relax, it seems more of like a fleeting thing that I've heard it in, like, oh, I worked so hard today, I need to do X for a small time period to recuperate. But it's never like, I should go to therapy or I should really work through some issues because I'm interplaying this like trauma I'm carrying with my boss at work and then my kids here at home. And so yeah, I think it can be really helpful for us to show to them and normalize like, you know, today was a really hard day. I need to like either do some meditation, I need to do something for myself so that I can interact with the world in a way that I feel more comfortable with and that is not negatively impacting the people I love around me. And I think I've had personally like instances where I've said stuff like, man, I work really hard, I need to go on vacation. And my parents have been so supportive of that, you know, and they're like, I love to hear that. I want to work. I worked so hard so that you could enjoy things, you know? And then reminding my family, like, hey, you can, if we have the tools now that we feel like a little bit settled or that we can rely on each other, like, let's rely on each other and do things that make us feel better and like take care of our mental health, whether it be like sitting for a really long dinner together or like going to a community center to do, you know, like work together or like have a class together. Mental health doesn't always have to be this like sit down, like white centric, I analyze you in this room and tell you how things are going and you reflect to me your life. You know, even on the panel, there's so many people doing incredible things through like body, through talking, through whatever. So being able to reflect to the older generations, like, hey, I take care of myself, and because it also affects everybody else that I'm around, and it's normal, it's not selfish. And like I hate to say like we've worked hard to do this because this should be something we do in general. You know, it's not a reward. But that's still like my own shit I'm working through, that like you have to work hard to take care of yourself later as dessert. But that's kind of the frame I put it with like my family, where it's like, yeah, I do work hard, but I also have to take care of myself. I take care of my teeth. I got to take care of myself and my soul and my brain, you know?
Yeah, that's very true. Luce?
I think my pattern usually was to kind of suck it up and keep pushing forward. I was a single mom, and the times that I did, or when I was with my cub's father, I was still the breadwinner, like the primary, everything. Even though he was there, he wasn't he didn't contribute monetarily very much, or as a caretaker. So I had to like carry the load there. And then with my husband, I also was like the primary breadwinner. So kind of assuming, roles and just having to like suck it up. I did that for years until I couldn't do it anymore, and then shifted to, working less. And although, because I homeschooled my kids, like I always worked for myself, and I made, my kids, or raising my kids and healing like my family the priority. I would say that, I've been working like part-time and for myself for years. But I think it was more like the emotional stuff to push through, or to deny, like domestically violent, stuff, or things that happen when you have PTSD, you deny or disassociate, or just keep pushing. So yeah, so when, the whole COVID thing came around, I was kind of already in that zone of, being home and taking it easy and taking care of myself. So it hasn't been that huge of a shift for me, fortunately. but I do know like my friends or my cub, like one of my cubs is having a harder time than the other cub. And it's like a personality thing,
Yeah. That makes sense.
So,
Yeah. I do want to ask, yeah, Hannah.
I just wanted to add, when Tanya was sharing earlier, Maslow's hierarchy of needs came to mind.
Yeah.
Is that our parents were really dealing on that bottom level to care for us, right? And they paved the way with their blood, sweat, tears, and bodies so that we could go up the triangle or the pyramid and reach that self-actualization. And I've seen my parents shift where, and my father's passed, but as they saw the younger generation and their children finding their place in society and becoming more independent and more secure, suddenly they became less defensive and more open and more willing to explore their needs because they had already fulfilled that first tier. And it took me a long time to forgive my parents for not teaching me certain things, for modeling racism and fear and xenophobia and ethnocentrism and other terrible cultural things. But once I understood and learned about these things and educated myself, I was able to process and forgive and work on my own trauma from my parents and my community, and to together work up the hierarchy of needs. So
yeah, that makes sense. I feel that is very true, and I see that as well with my parents. That it almost sometimes feels like I have. Sometimes it almost feels like I have the luxury of depression, kind of thing. It's like I get to be like, oh, I'm so sad today, and it's like I do actually still feel a bit sometimes the guilt because I feel like they don't identify with that at all. Which I mean, I'm very sure that they have felt it and experienced it, but they're just so at the place of like what is more important. There's so many other priorities that they have and we're focusing on, and they don't have time to deal with a sort of luxuriant sadness. It's like, oh, so it's interesting sometimes to watch that. And I actually wanted to ask about that. I might as well, before getting to the microaggressions, do you all, because it sounds like, I know when Tanya, you mentioned that it's difficult for you to, like, you feel like relaxing has to be dessert. And so I'm wondering how many of us experience guilt at taking it easy and relaxing, or how many of our friends and people in our community do you hear have this sort of guilt to taking time for themselves? And if you feel that that is part of what plays into making it difficult for communities of color to go to therapy or to go to a meditation retreat and yoga classes, whatever, and really to take time for themselves. So how do you feel that guilt plays into self-care? Anybody who wants to begin?
I guess I'll go.
Oh no, go ahead, sir.
Okay. I don't have a problem self-caring for myself. So I kind of lead the charge for all my friends that do struggle with it. So I'm kind of like, come on, like, don't work, like, do that later. It's not going anywhere. Like, let's go to the beach, or let's go eat, go have lunch, or, I'm big on getting my nails done and my hair done, and, like those kind of pampering things, as well as naps and all that good stuff. So I try to encourage people and my children, because I think especially my older cub internalized a lot of my, like, just grin and bear it and, work even though you're dying or you're sick. So I'm constantly working with them, to, like, not stress about money, or don't, you'll get taken care of, or chant and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think now that I'm older, I'm kind of like encouraging everybody else to, just take care of yourself, because life is short. And I think especially now with this whole COVID thing, we're all finding out how truly short and unpredictable everything is. And then put on top of that, state sanctioned violence. you know, life is we don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Mm.
So got to pamper today. Treat yourself.
Yeah, that is true. Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, anybody? Or thank you, Luce. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I love that energy because it's so needed, right? This idea that I'll speak for myself personally, although I don't like to be part of a capitalist society, it is truly ingrained in me now where I feel like I have to work so hard, I have to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not happy with the system, but I have to do it to survive, and then I can rest, right? Um, I think about there's weekends where I'll just like sit on the couch and lay down and just be like watching Netflix all day. And how many times am I like, oh my God, I'm such a piece of shit. I'm just laying on the couch. Oh my God, like this is embarrassing. If somebody saw how many hours I've been laying on this couch, and then I have to remind myself, like, who cares? You're not doing anything wrong. Like, you have a full-time job and you like work on top of that. Your body needs to rest, and it's not even about deserving this. This is what your body needs, you know? So I think oftentimes I find myself feeling guilty for relaxing too much. Like, it's okay to rest some, but not enough. Too much, I mean, is shameful. But then when I see it in other people, I'm like, yes, go relax. Like, what kind of world is this if we're just working, or like our whole mind, our whole internal monologue is to produce and to produce and to produce. Like, what if if your mindset is that production is the way to go, then produce joy in your life, you know, like produce good relationships. This is all part of production, you know? Mm-hmm. So I definitely agree that it, like, for me at least, it takes a big shift sometimes to reprioritize. Like, about 3 years ago, my father passed away, and I was like, whoa. I need to care about what's really important here. I'm like, I want to spend more time with relatives. I want to spend more time with my friends. I know there will always be piles of work. Like what Luce is saying is, yeah, the work will always be there, you know? So I really try to refocus, and it lasts for a while. And then I go back, and it's like this kind of cycle of like feeling bad again if I'm not working enough. So yeah, it's just kind of managing that inner monologue, or even like external pressures, you know?
Yeah. I have found too, in a similar vein, that it is difficult for me to relax, and I almost feel like a huge part of it is based on the fact the immigrant experience that my parents have, and the idea that, you know, there's so much to be done. Like, you know, you get here to America, and it's like, you know, they didn't speak English and had to find work, you know, in the hospitals as doctors and stuff like that. And they managed to do it. And so it's sort of like, there's so much to be done. There isn't time to rest. And so for me, that's usually what happens for me, that play of like, you shouldn't be resting. There's so much to be done. That is the constant wording in my mind that's happening. But yes, Hannah, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I tried to write it down to be concise. So addressing the kind of guilt when trying to seek self-care, for, you know, my community, there's this cultural dynamic of, especially with the first generation, but it's trickled down into the second, and we're just discovering it as moms, you know, and leaders, and just adults. But it's that our Asian cultures really think communally. It's not Western thinking that's very individualistic. So self-care means first you have to have a self and be aware of it. You know, this is a funny story, but my mom was at the doctor's maybe 15 years ago, and the doctor asked her, are you happy? And she came home and she told me this story about how she said, I had no idea why he was asking or what he was asking, and I had no idea how to answer. And it's because she really, until my father, who was mentally ill and abusive at times, he was kind of unstable, until he passed and she could rediscover herself and heal from all the trauma, she didn't have an I. Her I completely was centered on the we of, in our family, I am your wife, my kids' mother. At the hospital, I am my patient's nurse, right? So there's no sense of I as a woman for a lot of API. And my value, even when I start to find that I, really lies on my ability to serve others, right? Codependency is built into my culture. And just really trying to survive, right? So for me personally, as a second generation, Korean American woman, I've really had to deal with mental health issues and also psychosomatic kind of physical health issues. So if I don't want to be somebody who continues the traumatizing behavior my father had, I don't have a choice. Like, I have to sleep extra during this pandemic. Right?
Yeah.
I have to have that glass of wine or chocolate, or for me, all these little things that seem like indulgences for others, for me, it's just, I need to get to a baseline. That's not where I usually am physically and mentally. So I am forced to do self-care if I want to be present, if I want a certain quality of life, and if I don't want to hurt others, honestly. And it's hard to admit that, but I become a destructive person if I don't engage in self-care on the regular. And then real quick with the microaggressions, and we, at least in my conversations, especially with other Christians, other Asian Christian women, we're just finding language about this stuff. I just learned the term anti-racist this year, and I'm so happy, and I can't wait to learn. But this is a new thing. No one's told me before. So, microaggression, that's a newer word too. That is something that I wasn't even aware of, because my parents and Hattie's mother-in-law, actually, she was sharing that was held at gunpoint, on the daily in her liquor store or her store to empty her cash register. So when we're hearing from our parents and our community members, oh, I almost got shot, I'm afraid of these people because of these experiences. We're just like, oh, okay. So then as an Asian American adult now, if I'm not experiencing a gun in my face, I'm good. Like, I have a good life. It's not like mom and dad. So to be aware of microaggression and even to find language to say something is a newer thing. I, 10 years ago, had a chance at my seminary to be a part of organizer community to call out a microaggression from this guy who was just being really blatantly racist, but I had, experienced microaggressions. And it took a lot of us, because we were like, are we being overly sensitive, right? Are we complaining too much? Are we being this? Are we being that? We were so worried. But once we got together, we were like, oh my God, we're all experiencing racism on the daily with this one guy, and we need to do something about it. But it wasn't until we communally came together and found that collective I and we together that we found a voice.
Yeah. I agree that it does seem like I respond the same way with microaggressions, that I do need oftentimes, and I'm trying to get better at it. The last 2 years I've been better at calling them out, even if I'm by myself, but I have needed before to have people validate what I'm feeling, experiencing, so that I can be sure that I'm not being like, oh, am I just being like an overly sensitive Black person? Like, it's like you just get a little confused because, so I've experienced that same thing where it feels like I have to kind of struggle to be okay with saying something or speaking out against something. Tanya and Luce, you didn't get to speak to microaggressions and how you deal with them and things like that. So I don't know if either of you want to throw anything in about that.
Sure. I mean, I'd love to respond about that. I think microaggressions are something that a lot of us face daily, even. It's actually been nice in a way to be quarantined, because it's really limited who I interact with, and I don't have to deal with a lot of that stuff unless it's like work related. But for me, I think it's always important to think about not only how you will feel in addressing a microaggression, but the example you're setting too. I'm one to call things out, but I'm also like a chameleon in a way where I'm like, this is about my survival too. Like I'm at a job right now where I got like my foot out the door, so I'm being way more vocal. But in the middle of it, I was like, I just need to get my paycheck and get out of here. Like, these people aren't my friends. They say ignorant stuff. I've tried calling it out. They're not going to learn from it. It just paints them, it has them paint me as problematic, like the spicy Latina, you know? So this is a lost cause. And now that I'm on my way out, I'm like thinking about my safety. I'm like, I don't need letters of rec from them anymore. You know, like, I can say stuff, and I don't think it's right to stay silent for what? Like, to keep them comfortable against my own comfort, you know? So I used to call things out like head on. Like, I'd be like, that's really racist. Or I'd be like, oh, like, you know, if I work in a hospital setting, so oftentimes if I introduce myself as like a therapist or like a psychologist in training, people would either have something to say about my gender or like my age or whatever. I guess I have a young face. I think it's normal looking, but they'd be like, you, or like, how old are you? Or, oh, I thought a doctor was coming in, but I know that you mean like a man, you know? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'd use humor, but point it out and be like, oh yeah, remember the days when only men could be doctors? Or like, yeah, I appreciate that you think I look young, but like my birth certificate doesn't say that, you know? But now with stuff that's more like inter-team wise, I'll just like put it on them, because I'm like, I'm so sick of being the one pointing this out and then you questioning me, like, oh, you're being sensitive, or oh, why do you think that? I'm like, anyone else feel uncomfortable with that statement? And I like gets it off me for them to discuss. And I've thrown that out there a few times, and some people will be like, oh, I don't see anything wrong with it. And I'll be like, okay. Like, it kind of gives them more space to reflect and have the discomfort put on them instead of on me. And I don't have to be on a teaching role, you know? Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that, like, you know, the term microaggression, I think people often think like, oh, that it's micro in size, like they're innocent things. But the idea of micro, or the definition of microaggressions, is about micro in that it's interpersonal and not a large institutional systemic problem, but a interpersonal one. So they can still be like really painful and really send these hugely denigrating messages to the person that's receiving it. And it's so hard because even the word microaggressions is almost like, we think, am I making a big deal out of this? Is this like really not? I mean, they said something, but I don't know the intent behind it. But I think growing up as like a person of color, like, we're all experts in racism at this point. Like, you know when it's racist. It's just about how to maneuver addressing it.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, Luce, if you have anything.
Yeah, I'm trying to be less confrontational. I'm like, I just want peace. Yeah. But my MO usually is to confront people on it. Like, what did you mean by that? You know, or are you trying to say X, Y, and Z? So yeah, I mean, it's the New Yorker in me, and I'm just trying to mellow out. Be less aggressive all the way around, macro, micro, whatever. Yeah, I'm just trying to chill out. Also, I think the whole COVID thing has really made me reassess how I use my energy, you know, and, you know, fighting like New York style is just a little, it's not sustainable, and it's just too much. Like, it wears on your immune system, it wears on your ability to sleep, it wears on, you know, so many things, like your mental health, that yeah, I'm just trying to take either like you were saying, Tanya, about just the whole quarantine thing. Just, it's been really nice to not be on the train. I have to like fight for pregnant women for a seat, or people with canes, or, you know, because I'm that person, you know, like, hey, can everybody see, you know, this person, you know, needs, you know, a seat, and I'm just sick of being that person, and I can't switch it off. So for me, it's been a blessing to not have to commute, not have to be on a train, not having to fight for anyone, not having to like any of that, it's been really nice.
Mhm. That makes sense. Yeah. The silver lining of COVID is definitely not taking trains. So I can say that for sure.
And
Um,
walking everywhere.
yeah, yeah. So I also wanted to actually dive into when there is truly diagnosed mental illness and how difficult that is to talk about in communities of color, and how, how you've seen people dealt with in that way. How do people respond to them, and things like that? Like, I know for my family, with, as I said, we're Haitian. So for many of them, there's a lot of like mental health issues that they really don't talk about and don't label as such, and just kind of, it's sort of like, oh, that's how the person is. Or certainly for dementia, that's not something at all. Alzheimer's, dementia, that's not something that they speak about at all. And my uncle is experiencing that now, and he lives in Haiti, and there's no like nursing homes and these kinds of things where it's like, oh, there's a safe place where he can be placed. And then also there's, my mom has expressed fear about, as it gets worse, perhaps him leaving the house and getting lost. And even though people in the community knowing him, that because he is suffering Alzheimer's and doesn't know where he is, that instead of helping him, they will hit him and, beat him, because it's like they feel like, oh, there's like a demon in him, or there's, like it's a different thought process than like, oh, he has Alzheimer's, I should be like, where did you come, like help. And so that's part of the issue that I realize about when there's actual mental health issues, how rarely it's talked about in a language that helps people to feel seen, accepted, and how difficult it is then for our communities to basically talk about the need for help and to speak up about the issues that we're actually having, because very often it's barely even labeled or talked about, or, so acknowledged. So I'm wondering what you all have to say about the experiences that you have seen or encountered regarding people that have mental health issues, whether they have been diagnosed even, or let's say that they have been, how they are then treated or seen.
That's a really important question. I mean, I was working in so many different kind of arenas. Like I was doing home health, like crisis management. I would come to the home and do therapy sessions. I've worked in hospitals. I've worked in outpatient clinics. And it's so interesting because there's this idea. I mean, I was doing a lot of my work in New York City. And there's an idea in general, right, that like people of color don't seek therapy, or are distrustful of mental health providers, prefer to like go to the church, or prefer to, keep it at home or not talk about certain things. But I will say, like, most of my patients have always been people of color, like Black folks in the Caribbean, Latinos, Asian. It really depends on what the quote unquote, I hate this word, but like what the quote unquote like dysfunction is. I've noticed that for some people, they're willing to come seek help if it's like interfering in their job. Like maybe there's some schizophrenia and like paranoia and or like mood disorder, and they're like, I like need to work and send money home. Like you just need to give me something to help me to be able to do that. But then there's kind of like a disconnect and a difficulty in trying to engage them in actual therapy. Or I feel like it's the opposite, where people are like, immigrants would come and bring me their children, and they'd be like, help my kids, but I got shit to do. Like, I can't sit here and be part of the therapy. Or not even understanding sometimes that like, hey, your child's been diagnosed with like a mood disorder like depression or bipolar disorder. Like, do you know what that is? Can we talk about it? What treatment looks like? And they're like, well, I don't even understand what they're sad about, and trying to explain that it's not necessarily like because they're sad, they're depressed. It's like there's a chemical imbalance, or maybe there's an environmental issue going on in the family or in their world. So it can be difficult. I do think there's always a way to access someone in a way that they care about. Like with families that are like not into mental health, like I've had families, and I grew up in like a pretty religious house, saying like, well, we'll just go to church and we're gonna pray for them. And I'll talk to them and I'll be like, listen, yeah, do that. That would be really helpful for them. But also, like, God puts people in our lives to help, and like this might help your kid. And are you willing to do that? And some people aren't, and some people are, or like try and get them to reframe how they're thinking about it. Like there's particularly the example you were giving, Michelle, about like thinking that like, oh, they're, if your uncle was to get out and people being worried and reacting with like violence or fear, is like, I know it's kind of like an extreme example and it might not work, but like even trying to talk to community members about like, yeah, if you are worried about him, help him get home, like what does it say in our community that like we're trying to hurt people that we're afraid of, so it's hard. I do say that I do think that it's like a mix too. There are plenty of people of color who are willing to come to therapy and want therapy for their children or for their loved ones, but it depends also on like the regional aspect. Like people in big cities, I think, are more willing to do it because they see it around them, or there's, in the US and New York, there's like social workers in the schools, in California here too. But the more quote unquote like mainstream it seems, the more willing I think people are to try it, particularly when the services are free. It's like, what's the harm in trying unless like, maybe it's a mismatch with the therapist and the therapist saying some wild shit to the kid. But I think there is a willingness if it's available and there's some gentle exploration of what the hesitation is.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in?
I'll just share, and I'm gonna try and be concise again. I'm not gonna be, but I'll try. Just when it comes to, I think, diagnosis and treatment, there's just a huge lack of it in the API community. There's a lot of stigma against help seeking. And, for my parents' generation, when they came in the 70s and 80s, all the mental health professionals were Caucasian. And mostly men. So it's not a safe space, right? Because these are the very people that my immigrant parents and the community members were kind of scared of looking bad in front of, right? Or being judged by, because daily life was already hard enough. So there was a distrust to start with. But even now, I think that lack of dealing with trauma from the very beginning and not beginning a dialogue and not bringing it into our communal language, it's just so foreign, right? So I kind of, I can speak to my experience in my culture specifically, is that Koreans have Han, because we've been this tiny little peninsula nation between Japan and China, oppressed, really for hundreds, thousands of years. And we carry this pain and this anger, really. And, to this day, Korea's, one of the top nations for suicide, right? People of all ages. And I see in K-Town and just in our Korean communities, if I hear about a single youth group that has never experienced kids cutting, having eating disorders, or having suicidal ideation, I'm like, what are you doing right? Teach me. Because it's the norm for kids to experience trauma and mental health issues. But we don't talk about it because of the stigma. The other thing is that when it's just so clear, right? Like my churches that I've grown up in, people with special needs, maybe dual diagnosis, substance abuse issues. It's so embarrassing because your reputation and your honor is so much more important, that people will often isolate that person or hide. A lot of families had stopped coming to community gatherings altogether because They got stares, they got comments, they were made to feel uncomfortable, microaggressions from their own people. So they would just disengage and then struggle alone. So I really have sought to understand that, and learning about, Maslow's intergenerational trauma, and cultural immigration history, and race dynamics, all that has really been so helpful. But it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. My burden personally is to go back into the churches, because I left for a long time really angry. But to go back into the churches and to ask the immigrant parents, every church has seen at least one young person kill themselves and take their own life, or end up in jail, or end up on the streets, or there's been consequences because of the silence. We need to start bringing it into the church dialogue and talk about how it's a part of this good news you keep talking about. It needs to be relevant, because lives are being lost, particularly when we have young API and faith communities, and they're like, I'm LGBT, right? Those kids are the ones that, in the schools I was working at, every single one of them had struggled with cutting and suicidal ideation. So I think it's just so important to keep talking about it. Also to learn peacemaking skills, reconciliation skills, conflict resolution. Those are things that I feel like the second generation we're just starting to learn. But yeah, it's a load. It's a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Luce?
I think maybe women in general, or I don't know if this is a generalization, are more open to therapy or healing. Because just recently I had a conversation with a young Black man who has health issues, and his friend, once they found out I was a therapist, his friend's like, oh yeah, I've been telling him that he needs to talk about, whatever it is that he was going through. And just speaking with him made me realize how, especially Black men, that, they're conditioned to be strong, and that, to be depressed or to feel bad or to be tired is a weakness. And, stemming back, to the DNA and, slavery, you had to, be the strong one. You had to, take abuse or, for survival. So I think, the more people talk about it, the more access, the more choices people have, because, not everybody's going to connect to everyone. So if there's just more choices, there's like more, trans, therapists, or more therapists of color, then everybody has something that they gravitate to, or someone that they can speak to and feel comfortable speaking to and feeling safe.
Yeah. I see what you mean. I wonder, also, welcome, Maria, by the way. If you do have any questions, okay, you can either raise your hand or you can write it in the chat. Okay, so.
Thank you.
Yes, sure. We're leaving it as an open dialogue. So
okay, great.
A thought, comment, question, don't feel that you.
Yeah, no, my name's Maria. I actually work with individuals that have mental health issues and helping them find jobs. And a lot of the individuals that I work with are people of color. And so this is a great, because I wanted to come in just to understand it more, because it's something that I'm still on a learning curve with, and I really want to be able to grasp that so that I can be better able to serve the clients that I work with.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Maria, for joining. So yeah, I wanted to just actually talk about how often have you found that people that had true mental disorders were not diagnosed? I have actually seen a lot of my teacher friends have mentioned how the discrepancy that they've seen in real time of if a young white student that they have is not doing well in school, there will be an immediate thought to let's see if maybe, there's some depression, or, there's a thought about mental health and what's going on. But that when the Asian or Black or Hispanic students are not doing well, there's a thought of this person is just not paying attention, they're not trying hard enough, they're not listening, they're to just combative. So I want to sort of have a conversation about what does that look like? How often have you seen people not get diagnosed, and instead of being spoken to from a lens of compassion, are instead sort of looked at as rebels and things like that? Anyone want to jump in?
I guess as a teaching artist, I've seen it a lot, where particularly the Black little boys, if they just are being children, they're like jumpy, and especially like doing capoeira. So, they're like excited, and, I do a cartwheel, and then they all want to do it at the same time. I've seen, and then let's say I'm leading the class, but there's also like the teachers there. They'll be mean and sometimes abusive to the Black boys, like yelling at them, or so, all to say that, like maybe if a child has behavioral issues, it's usually passed off like, oh, they're just a troublemaker, or they're instead of like, oh, maybe there's something going on at home, or maybe, they moved, or, there was a transition, or, maybe something's going on with mom, or their father, or whatever. So yeah, and that's like really hard. It's a hard pill to swallow, like especially when you're a visiting, teacher, so it's like you only have that one little hour, to make a positive impact on this kid's life, but that kid is gonna be with the teacher, for a lot of time, and then that kid's gonna be with the parents, a lot of time, and then these are the kids that slip through the cracks, unfortunately. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's Black boys who become Black men. So yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually, I feel like I've had a different experience in that, especially when I was working with kids in the home, I would have to visit their schools and see how they're doing. And I found that when Black or Latino kids were being like disruptive in school, it was an immediate disorder. Like, oh, they have oppositional defiant disorder, or they have this, there must be something going on. Whereas like some of the white clients that I worked with, the students, like it was like, I wonder if they have like ADHD, or I wonder if there's like an attentional something going on. It was always like kind of like the better disorder, like, oh, there's something wrong with their attention. But like with the kids of color, it was like they're bad,
Well, as a teacher, unfortunately, so because I wasn't a clinician, like they wouldn't tell me if the kids had anything. Mm-hmm. So even if they did, I wasn't allowed to know by law, which was difficult for me as a teacher, because I'd have to like surmise, or like, yes.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah, and it was really difficult, and that's actually what was the catalyst for me to go into a doctoral program, because I was like, oh, then I get to be in charge of diagnosing, and a lot of what I think has been going on is that it's a hard topic to talk about, because I think sometimes people really want a diagnosis for their kid, because then they're like, okay, then I can get accommodations, I can get medication. It means something's wrong with my kid and not with the environment I'm providing, Mm-hmm. But then there are other people who are like, there's nothing wrong here. That's just how they are. And when there really is like a disorder that could be treated, and the kid could live a better, more fulfilling life, instead of feeling like they're getting in trouble at school all the time. Or, with adults where they're like, oh, it's okay for a man to have a substance use problem because he's going out drinking, smoking, and womanizing or sleeping around with whomever, but it's not okay to talk about what's fueling the substance use. Is it like depression? Is it mood disorder, bipolarity, whatever, or unresolved trauma, or even at a very base level, like not being able to express any emotion except anger and horniness, So it's been difficult for me because I often work on teams where they're very quick to provide a diagnosis, and I'm really trying to conceptualize what's going on with the environment. And I'm not against medication, I'm not against diagnosing, but I don't think that we can be able to do those things right away without understanding the person and without understanding their environment. Like, can we talk to the family? And if we talk to them, is there gonna be pushback on this person because they want to come to therapy, or they want to do group treatment, or they want to do family therapy, Sometimes a big part of the hurdle is addressing the environment before we're addressing the one person. Because like you were saying, some families don't want to hear about a disorder. Like, this is just how it is. And even if there is a treatment plan in place and this person is trying to work on their own singularly to get better, like, I'm going to say really nasty things to them, like, well, this is happening to you because you don't pray enough, or this is happening to you because you're not right, you don't think straight, all the work I've done, and this is how you want to live your life. So it's a really difficult conversation because there's so many possibilities, but I think a big part of trying to see if like a disorder or not is appropriate is really looking at the environment first. Like, could this be easily resolved particularly with kids? Like, yeah, of course most kids show attention deficit. Like, the world we're living in is in like minutes. They see like TikTok videos, like we put them in front of a screen and they're able to like zoom through stuff, and then we used to ask them to sit in class for like 8 hours and pay attention. Like, oh, of course, that's not the same environment that they're being raised in, but then we can check to see like, okay, beyond that, are there things like attention deficit or hyperactivity or whatever, mood disorder.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Hannah, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely, being in a lot of IEP meetings and translating both Korean and, whatever Spanglish I could manage, I definitely saw that. I definitely saw a lot of that overdiagnosis or misdiagnosis, and people really not taking the time to hear kids' stories and get to know their families and environments. I did my social work internship in Skid Row with the Downtown Women's Center. That was one of the most life-changing things, really. And when we were learning about treatment planning and diagnosis and stuff, my supervisor said, we don't subscribe so much to the medical model because we're not looking to fix them or to medicate them, even though they have a psychiatrist on staff. What they said was, when you're looking to treat, think of it as asking them what's happened to you, not what's wrong with you. So, usually with DMH and other kind of government, federally funded mental health orgs, you're really pushed to diagnose quick, even in private practice, because you got a bill, right? Someone's got to pay for the services. But with the Downtown Women's Center, fortunately, we were a trauma-informed, care center, and they gave us, 6 weeks or something, a really, really long time to come to a diagnosis. And they said, even then, it's not central. That being said, for me, diagnosis has brought a lot of clarity and healing and direction and focus. And it really being able to even diagnose, my father, even after he passed, was so clarifying. Getting diagnosed with ADHD in college for me was I mean, I was, struggling with suicidal ideation for years because I thought something was defective. And then learning that, this is normalized in this category. I'm okay. There's hope for me. That was really healing and empowering. But in the API spaces that I've been in, which are largely faith-based, and also the Latinx communities that I've been exposed to, a lot of faith-based spaces, 100% silence and lack of treatment, lack of diagnosis. And if you get to know the families really well and you're in close, trusting relationships, you'll get a 2 a.m. text saying, I can't find my kid, I don't know if they're drunk, dead, overdosed in an alley or what. Or my daughter, who has been this perfectly fine person, has suddenly had a break with reality. What do I do? You're the only mental health person I know. And I know you won't sell me out or call 911 or other things, right? So yeah, being, and I kind of wrote this down, but in the Asian kind of cultural framework, being different or labeled as defective, it's really frowned upon because we really value conformity out of generations of really hunkering down together and conforming and trying to appear like, power in numbers, right? We're all the same, because bad things happen when you stick out, right? We do it to one another, and then we also see it happening out in larger society. But your public reputation is really, really important, and death is better than shame. Right. My father, who had several issues physically and mentally, once told me when I was young, if you're ever kidnapped or just raped and then you get pregnant, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And he said, I will make sure that I kill our whole family and then I'll commit suicide. So we won't have to suffer, and our relatives and our community won't have to suffer the shame of this. I was dumbfounded as a teenager when he said that to me. And I spiraled me into depression and suicidal ideation right away. And later when I realized, my father had been hospitalized several times for trying to take his own life. He was struggling with alcoholism, depression, bipolar disorder. It all makes sense now in retrospect. But the big message was, it's cool, we can find ways to get out of the trouble, and the worst thing would really be shame. So, even when I was getting diagnosed, and I've heard this similarly with a lot of API women, my parents were really, and my mom was just really like, I don't want to talk about it. Because if you say it out loud, especially if you're on meds, it's real, right? There's power in words. And I do believe there's power in words. But for me, those words were powerfully healing and empowering. But for her, it was like, great. Now I have to tell people that I'm really close to that my daughter has ADHD, depression, and anxiety, and that my husband was this and this, right? She doesn't want to stick out or look bad. And also, a lot of people had tried therapy when they were really, really desperate, or had interactions in the ER with their, husband who had tried to take his own life. And a lot of it was like, these white doctors were pushing this and this and this on us and telling us we were this and this out of their, their medical professional views. But it's really white American values, and we don't subscribe to that. Our worldview is not white, it's not Western, right? And we think about the history of the DSM too, homosexuality was once a diagnosis, and now we're enlightened enough to be like, that was so wrong. But hey, maybe in 20, 30 years, we're gonna look back and be like, hey, even the current DSM we have now was really problematic, and it really marginalized a lot of people and mistreated a lot of people. So I think all those factors are kind of big. And then, the big thing is, and this is across the board with people, there's this fear to address the pain and the trauma because it's like a Pandora's box. And if you crack it open, because it's been held so tightly just to survive on that first level of Maslow's, if you crack it open or rip it open, it's going to explode. And then we don't know if you're going to be there to help me with the aftermath. It's just too scary.
Yeah. That's true. There is a lot of the weight of the history of trauma that we've communities of color have experienced. It does feel like that, the sense of I don't know how far I can go down the rabbit hole because will I get out on the other side? What will it look like? Yeah. And I guess I want to ask also about being a woman in this community of colors, and what it looks like to speak up or ask for help in the fact that as a woman, we are often dismissed generally. Most of our cultures, I think all of our cultures, are sexist. So we deal with that. And then, now we're trying to, say that we need some help, or as a, single mom, oh, I'm tired. And it's the sense of like, you shouldn't be, you are the woman who's supposed to be saving the day. And all that sort of thing, or just even trying to get diagnosed as a woman and being dismissed, which happens a lot to women of color, which is why, a lot we see that women of color that are pregnant, die at higher rates than women that are white, because of the fact that it's sort of like, you'll be fine. You know what I mean? Like, you can get through slavery, you can get through this, deal with it kind of thing. So what do you feel about that when you look at your mothers, grandmothers, or friends that are female, and how often do they seek help, or say that they need help? And how is that request for help received? And then how do you maybe encourage women in your communities to take the time to admit that they need help, or not feel shamed or guilty for the fact that perhaps they aren't able to bear the entire burden of the whole world?
I will say one thing that I've been very thankful for is when I was working in community clinics and like hospitals that service predominantly like people of color, it was usually people of color that didn't have much money, right? So they were getting like free or cheap services. And I always think of the idea of therapy to be like a very class-driven thing. Like if you can get to a certain class level, then you can afford this like luxury, right? And when I was working in the hospitals and like outpatient clinics where people of color were coming in, I was like, wow, this is like great. You have access to this. There's group therapy, there's parenting classes, there's, wellness classes, and there's like individual therapy for you at your disposal. And I would find so much of my work, particularly with mothers, was to let go of this super mom, like I should do this, I should be doing that, everything should be the focus for my family, my kids. I don't have time to relax because I'm raising the next generation. And particularly like in hetero couples, I'd be like, right, but how much does like your husband shoulder or your partner shoulder, and then with single mothers, I'd be like, it's okay to be exhausted, and in communities of color, I always encourage that we use our communities. Like, we're community oriented. Like, we should lean on each other and be able to help each other in a lot of different ways that aren't really, not that I would say they're not deemed appropriate in like Western society, but like, especially in the US, it's like, you got to make it on your own. You got to do it on your own. You got to be this independent, whatever. And even with myself, I have to remind myself like, oh yeah, I have a community of people I can rely on if I need help with something, so it's difficult. I feel that oftentimes like the older generations of women are willing to, the ones that are willing to come to therapy, the focus wants to be on like their children and like provision for them. And sometimes I just have to orient my own outlook too, as like, this is a huge part of their lives. Of course they want to talk about this, but also opening up the space where like I say it blatantly to them. I'm like, I know you're tough. I know that you're balancing so much, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to be that way here with me, and I think being able to even provide a space for vulnerability for women can be really helpful, even if they're like, no, I'm actually kind of good. Like I'm maintaining, it's stressful, it's hard, but I can do this. Like just giving them the space of the possibility of being like, yo, you can break down in here and I'm not gonna, like, it's fine. No one's gonna see it if you're worried about that. It's just me. But even giving that space is helpful. And the more positive experiences someone can have with a mental health provider, the more likely they are to like talk about it, and to not feel shame about it, and to be like, dude, you should go to therapy. Like, this has been really helpful for me, you know? Sorry, I kind of like spiraled there and like started answering other stuff, but yeah.
Thank you. No, that was good. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in?
I lost my thought. What's the question?
Just looking at dealing with women in the communities of color and how easy it is, for them to embrace needing help.
I think I suffer from the superwoman, you know, having been a single mom and the you know, breadwinner and taking care of men, grown-ass men, and, you know, not just one, but two, you know, just a kind of like my pattern from, you know, childhood. But I think as I got older and then my children starting to develop mental health issues, and then just reflecting on how I raised them and trying to do things different, you know, opening myself up that, yeah, I could be a therapist, but therapists need therapy too. And getting over my own shame of, you know, being like an imperfect mother, or, you know, having been a therapist and still be in a, you know, domestically violent relationship or two, you know, back to back. So just getting over the shame of it, and then like with my other friends that are also like have that superwoman thing, you know, we just talk to each other, you know. I just have like my core group of friends that are, you know, very similar in character, so we could unload on each other and there's no shame. And I think that's helpful.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Hannah, if you have anything to add.
I feel like they really covered the heart of it.
Mm-hmm. That's, yeah. And it is, I find it difficult, even the messaging that is often received. I was watching Insecure, which is a show that I very much love and think it's delightful. And Lawrence was out with his two friends or something, and you know, they were joking around, I think, I don't know. But anyway, in one of the comments that the guys was making was how like, oh yes, women nowadays are too, you know, they're so high maintenance. I remember when my grandmother, you know, she would get beat and wouldn't complain about anything, you know, sort of thing. So there's this sort of comparison in there that was just a line, but still it was obviously written. So there's this comparison of the idea that like, oh yeah, back in the day, women were so much better at being ride or die because they would just allow themselves to be sad and depressed and beaten and not complain. And that was a benefit. That was a good thing, that you had a strong woman who would just take the beatings and abuse and would just keep going. And that is, and so the fact that it was like nowadays, oh, women are so high maintenance in that they won't let you just beat them. Oh, Jesus, you know? So it was a very interesting line to hear from Insecure, in that most of the time, you know, the topics that they comment on and talk about are empowering. So that was actually it stuck out to me, because I felt like, wow, what an interesting message, that I don't know if they were conscious about or not, or if it was just like, oh, here's a joke and I'm going to just, you know, put it in. But it's like, yeah, how interesting that it's like, oh, these guys hanging out, and that's sort of the thought process that they're sharing. And I'm sure that there's other Black men who feel that way as well. Like, oh yeah, you know, my grandmother stayed forever and my mom didn't divorce no matter what my dad did. And it feels this sense of like a focus on what the woman did, as opposed to like, well, perhaps the grandfather shouldn't have beaten her, or, you know, should not have been a womanizer, or whatever abuse was happening. And so instead of this like sort of a raising up of the woman that could be strong enough to stay no matter what, is kind of the ideal that still happens, which is a little tough. And I'm sure it can be difficult for young women who feel like, oh, so I, you know, for me to be as strong as my grandmother or as powerful as these women that came before me. I need to stay and not complain or want better for myself. So it's interesting. I don't know if anyone has any sort of comment on that at all.
I was just reminded listening to you that a lot of women, we feel the need to be strong, and then as we journey on, we realize that we were built this way. We are strong. Mm-hmm. We're the ones that are carrying the baby, pushing it out in extreme pain, and nursing and going through a lot of that. And regardless of your spiritual religious views, whether women were created or other views, I really see that the image of God, or the beauty of the universe, lies in a woman, lies in a mother, lies in a daughter. So we really value this idea of strength. And people are truly trying to push quiet strength on women. Mm-hmm. But I think us learning to redefine what does strong mean. Quietness can be strength, but so can being super loud and bold. And Lucy, you talked about you can't shut it off, speaking up for the vulnerable. I was like, oh, I love that. If I have a daughter, I want her to be like that. But yeah, I've worked with a lot of mothers as clients who were talking about how great it is to be women and examples of women in their life. But a lot of these moms, they're dealing with domestic violence, generational domestic violence, abuse, sexual abuse, trauma from their own family members or community members. And we talk about how, at first it feels strong that you didn't fall apart. You dissociated, but you didn't fall apart. You were still functional, going to school, doing the dishes, all that. But really, does it mean that we're strong if we stay in an abusive relationship that's toxic to us? Do we need to redefine strength? And one Caucasian mom, she actually, we went through this process of her writing, because she's a writer, and we talked a lot about Brene Brown, how she talks about the strength of being vulnerable and exploring shame without fear, right? We talked about how strength and vulnerability go hand in hand, that it takes a truly strong person to be brave enough to be vulnerable and to face their pain and to work through it and to say, I want to learn to love me. And then I can love and serve better out of that, not out of obligation, but because I love me, right? So that just came to mind.
Thank you. Yeah. So, well, we are almost done. We just have, 10 minutes. So I just want to mention that in the chat, I did add the link for the newsletter and for New Women Spaces newsletter, and also the link for our events page for upcoming events. So in case you are interested in either of those things, but also I wanted to see if there was anything that you all may want to add as a final, thought about mental health in communities of color, because perhaps I didn't ask the question, or, the dialogue didn't go that way. And there's something that you want to make sure that you say and express. So we could just sort of go with our final thoughts and then we'll wrap it up.
Go ahead, Tanya.
No. Go ahead, Hannah. I was just thinking.
I've been reading a lot of forums and social media, and it's a lot of the women, white and people of color, who are speaking up. Mm-hmm. And I love it. I'm like, yeah, the future is female. The future is now. And, one sister, a white sister, who's a single mom, very honestly and very vulnerably said, I want to care more and engage more, but I'm tired. I'm barely surviving. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I'm having panic attacks and trying to parent alone. I lost my job, just really kind of putting it out there to say I want to, but I can't. And, I haven't engaged with her yet on it. And I was just like, I hear you, but thank you for caring. And thank you for saying that, for confessing and admitting that. But I think the thing that I've been struck by is this moment that we're in right now. That the I and the we need to come together, right? It's almost like this 360 that I've been doing, where I started out where my I really lied in the we, the communal identity. And then I went through an individuation and deconstruction process to question everything. And I found my I. But then I realized that when my I is isolated from the communal we and my community, it's incomplete. I need to know the histories of my forefathers and foremothers. And so right now I've been challenging myself and the people around me in my communities. George Floyd wasn't Korean, but he was a father, he was a son, he was a brother, he was a neighbor. We're all those things. We need to be able to step into his shoes and identify his pain and his family's pain as our pain, because we as individuals will never be whole until our family, which is all human beings, right, and our nation is whole together. So yeah, I think a lot of that mental health, especially with social work perspectives, it's like you do have to delve into the individual, but you also need to deal with the environment, as Tanya and you have been talking a lot about. And it needs to be kind of us coming together to say that the I and the we are interconnected.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, anybody else?
I think for me, a wrap up kind of thought that I wanted to express too is like when we talk about mental health and self-care, there's also like a push for all these positive emotions. Like we should feel relaxed, we should take care of ourselves, we should practice mindfulness. And sometimes it's very helpful to feel angry and to feel disgust, to feel disinterested about things. These also aren't emotions we should shame ourselves for. Truly being able to self-care is to move through your emotions and to feel them. So that's something I always remind people, that I'm like, part of self-care is really delving into your emotions too. Like, I'm really pissed off right now. Like a lot of the stuff I'm seeing on the news, like seeing friends that I thought we were like aligned ideologically, and then hearing them say like, well, I just don't believe in busting up anything. And I'm like, well, the reason that there is violence is because people feel unheard, you know, and the way to get attention on this topic is sometimes to destroy capital, you know. So I think it's really helpful for people to remember to express feelings. I'm not saying like, oh, you should just like go punch people in the face, but express your own emotions in a way that's like not negatively impacting your life, right? So if I'm feeling angry, I should sit in that and be like, why am I feeling angry? And like walk myself through what those thoughts are. And because I don't like feeling angry, I become a bad person to other people. I'm snappy, I'm rude, I'm bitchy. So I'm like, all right, well, for me to not do that, I need to release my anger in a way that's helpful for me. And then I can be more pleasant to have conversation with. I can be more loving in my life. So I just encourage people to work through all of their emotions so that it positively impacts their life and the life of others.
Yeah, thank you. That is very true. I do feel that there is always a focus on the, most often a focus on the positive emotions, and there really isn't much talk about, the fact that you may feel these shadow emotions, darker emotions, and what to do with them, how to accept them as well, you know, as valid. So, Luz.
I think with everything that's going on in the world with the pandemic and with, you know, people pushing back against state-sanctioned violence, and basically, you know, capitalism it's coming undone. It's not, it's unraveling, or people are questioning it. Our relationship to it is changing. You know, those folks that have lost their income, or, you know, all these things are coming into question. I think the beauty of it is how mutual aid has come to the forefront. You know, it's had different names or has been in existence in different communities, especially communities of color, before it had like a plug word. But it's been really nice to see, you know, these mutual aid groups have allowances for mental health, or have allowances for healing, to make it a priority as part of people's survival. That's been, you know, another one of those silver linings of this whole thing, is just seeing people like, I guess they call it care work, to see people taking care of each other and providing ways for, let's say, a practitioner to take care of people. It just seems like people are collectively coming together for mental health, for spiritual health, for wellness. And it's been really beautiful to observe and to be a part of.
That's true. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I really thank you ladies for joining me and talking about this. I do think it's a very important conversation and one that I want to keep having so that, we can feel that we are being seen and heard and that it's, we aren't forgotten. And so I do enjoy that we were able to come together and have this conversation. I have recorded it, so I will let you all know when it's all done and things. I can post it in like a drive and share it or something like this so you all can have it. But I do think it's something that is really interesting to be able to dialogue about. And I feel like I've learned a lot and taken a lot. I actually think that I will take the idea, Tanya, that if you have a producing mentality, you can also focus on producing joy. And so that's something that I think is interesting because, yeah, whenever I think of producing, I'm thinking of that I have to produce material things and be making money and get into the capitalist idea. And the fact that I can also turn that energy to producing joy is something that would be a huge benefit for me to focus on and be able to ask myself that question, is this producing joy, and feel that that's a valid question. Instead of feeling like, oh no, unless it's producing money or prestige or whatever, it isn't of value. So that I feel like these are important things to sort of keep thinking about and talking about. So thanks so much, ladies, for joining. And I will definitely be in touch. I will keep you posted about the video and things like that. And hopefully we are able to do this again and get a nice, intimate conversation going again on something else.
Yeah, it was so nice meeting everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Likewise, thank you so much.
Be safe, everybody, and take care of yourselves as best as you can.
Yes. Happy Sunday, everyone.
Yes.
Yes, drink more wine and water.
Yeah.
Switching. It's now time to hydrate.
Yes, right?
Yep.
Thanks, Mariella, for joining us. Okay. We will see you.
Bye.
Bye.